The small town garage was unusually quiet that Thanksgiving evening. Ethan stood alone inside, wiping the last streak of grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better days. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, reminding him that dinner at his sister's house had already started an hour ago. He imagined the long table filled with roasted turkey, creamy mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and laughter. It was the one night of the year when his family gathered without excuses, and for once, he had promised himself he wouldn't be late. Just as he reached for his coat and keys, the faint glow of headlights cut through the frosty air outside. Ethan paused. A tired-looking minivan rattled into the lot, steam hissing angrily from under its hood. The vehicle barely made it to the garage doors before shuddering to a stop. Inside the van, a man in his late 30s rolled down the window, his face lined with worry. Beside him sat a woman with pale features, holding a sleeping child. Another little girl peered over the back seat, bundled in a blanket that looked far too thin for the cold night. "Please," the man said, his voice strained. "We've been stuck out on the highway for hours. Every shop we called was closed. This was the only light we saw on. Can you help us?" Ethan's heart sank. His stomach had been grumbling all day, and he could almost hear his sister's teasing voice. "If you're late again, Ethan, I'm saving the pumpkin pie for someone else." For a moment, he considered telling the family he was closing up, that maybe they should wait until morning. But then his eyes landed on the children, one stirring in her mother's arms, the other shivering despite the blanket wrapped around her small shoulders. The image made his chest tighten. He let out a long sigh and gave a small nod. "Pop the hood." The man's relief was immediate. Thank you so much." Ethan grabbed his tools and stepped out into the biting wind. The hood lifted with a groan, releasing another puff of steam. He leaned in, flashlight clenched between his teeth, inspecting the mess of hoses and belts. The radiator had given out, and the engine was threatening to follow. It was the kind of job that demanded time Ethan had promised to spend with his family tonight. But there was no way he could send these people back onto the road. For the next 2 hours, Ethan worked tirelessly. His hands went numb from the cold, his breath visible in the night air. He tightened bolts, patched leaks, and coaxed life back into the tired engine. Every so often, he caught glimpses of the family inside the van. The mother stroked her children's hair, whispering reassurances. The little girl in the back seat pressed her face against the frosted window, watching Ethan with wide eyes full of hope. Grease streaked his cheeks, sweat mixed with the chill, and still he pushed on. His hunger was forgotten, his phone buzzing in his pocket with messages from his sister went unanswered. The only thing that mattered was getting that van back on the road. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Ethan tightened the last clamp and wiped his hands on his rag. "Try it now," he called. The father turned the key, and the engine sputtered before roaring to life. A cheer rose inside the van. The little girl clapped her hands, and even the baby stirred with a soft smile. Relief washed over their faces, the kind of gratitude words could never fully express. Ethan managed a tired grin. "You're good to go now. Just keep an eye on the temperature gauge until you can get it into a proper shop." The man climbed out of the van and grabbed Ethan's grease-stained hand, shaking it firmly. "You don't know what this means to us. Thank you for not turning us away." Ethan shrugged, modestly, though deep down his chest felt heavy with warmth. He had missed Thanksgiving dinner, but looking at the family's smiles, he couldn't bring himself to regret the choice. The night had grown even colder by the time Ethan finished the job, but the warmth of the family's gratitude was enough to keep the chill at bay. The father reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek leather wallet, fumbling slightly with cold fingers. He handed Ethan a credit card, insisting, "Please, let us pay you. You've given us more than we could have hoped for tonight." Ethan shook his head at first, rubbing the ache out of his hands. "It's Thanksgiving. Just get your family home safe." But the man pressed the card into his palm. "At least take something. You've saved us tonight." Ethan sighed and glanced down at the card. His eyes caught the name embossed in bold letters, and he froze mid-breath. Daniel Crawford. The name was instantly familiar. His picture had been in every auto magazine Ethan used to thumb through during slow days at the shop. Crawford was the CEO of Crawford Motors, one of the largest automotive companies in the country, a man whose innovations and leadership had shaped the very cars Ethan repaired for a living. Ethan blinked in disbelief. "Wait, you're Daniel Crawford?" The father smiled, a little sheepishly. "That's me, and this is my wife, Claire, and our kids, Emma and Jack." Ethan's jaw went slack. You're one of the biggest names in the auto industry. What on earth are you doing stranded in a beat-up minivan outside my garage? Daniel chuckled softly, his expression both humble and amused. Life has a sense of humor. We were traveling to visit family for Thanksgiving, took the older van to stay under the radar. Didn't expect it to betray us halfway here. Ethan still couldn't quite wrap his head around it. Of all the families who could have pulled into his small town shop tonight, it had to be that family. The Crawfords. Claire, the wife, spoke gently, her voice filled with sincerity. If you hadn't stayed open, if you hadn't helped, I don't know what we would have done. The kids were freezing, and the highway felt endless. You gave us more than a repair, you gave us comfort. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly embarrassed. I was just doing my job. Anyone would have helped, but Daniel shook his head firmly. Not anyone. Tonight, you could have locked the doors and gone to be with your family. You could have pretended you didn't see us. But you didn't. You chose to help, even when it cost you something. He paused, his eyes steady. That kind of character can't be taught. It's rare. The words hit Ethan harder than he expected. For years, he had felt invisible, just another grease-stained mechanic in a town few people cared about. Yet here was one of the most successful men in the automotive world, telling him he had something special. The family eventually drove off, waving as the van disappeared down the road, its engine humming steadily. Ethan watched them go, standing in the glow of the shop lights, feeling an odd mix of exhaustion, pride, and disbelief. Days passed, and life returned to its usual rhythm. Ethan was back at the garage, fixing up old sedans and trucks, his Thanksgiving sacrifice already fading into a warm memory. Then, one crisp morning, a letter arrived in the mail, embossed with the Crawford Motors logo. His hands trembled slightly as he tore it open. Inside was a neatly typed letter on heavy paper. Daniel Crawford himself had written it. Ethan, it began, your kindness on Thanksgiving reminded me of why this industry exists, not just to build cars, but to keep families moving, to keep them safe. Your dedication, skill, and heart are exactly the qualities I look for in people who represent my company. I would like to offer you a position as a senior mechanic with Crawford Motors. The pay is generous, the benefits substantial, and the opportunities limitless. But more than that, I hope you'll bring your heart for people into our team. Ethan reread the letter over and over, hardly able to believe it. This wasn't just an invitation to a job, it was a doorway into a future he had never dared dream of. His hands, the same ones that had been raw and cold that night in the garage, now shook with excitement as he realized what had happened. He had missed a single Thanksgiving dinner, but in doing so, he had found something far greater. His act of simple kindness had set off a chain of events that would change the course of his life forever.